Hey everybody, how are you doing? Afternoon, morning, evening to everybody. So I don't know where you're tuning from. So let me just make sure that everybody's covered. Like, so you're just about to watch the second session around during the Morehouse College African Awareness Week, which happened a couple of weeks ago. And this session was about African startups, innovation, also system change, right? And before going any further, so let me first of all stop and share my recognition acknowledgement to Next for Africa for the support that they have been bringing in taking this session together. So, so this session talked about startups in Africa. There is often a lot of focus on ideas, the next big app, the next big solution. But here is the reality. So a great idea, it's only the beginning, right? What truly determines success is how this idea fits with three levers, critical levers, I would say. The idea itself for sure, business model behind it, and more importantly, the system operates in. And Africa is one of those hiding place to build today. And as I sit in Tanzania in this specific week because I'm on business trip at the moment, beautiful Dar es Salaam, I could definitely say that system, that's very important, right? And it's also one of the most complex. So in Africa, environment to navigate on, infrastructure gap, regulatory dynamic, informal markets, they're not obstacles to avoid. They are realities that you need to understand if you stand a chance to make your venture work. So I think in this session, so we had as well the particularity of having students from a class joining us today, from I think student from Dr. Tiffany Bosi, I believe. And I think this session was about inspiration for them. So, and more than inspiration, was also about clarity. What does it really take to build Continent of Africa? What works, what fails, and why? And we explore that through the journey, insight, and also honest perspective of the panelists. And what we had Franklin Amu, who's an investment and diaspora journey. That's what he shared. So very tremendous entrepreneur. So Robert Turner, we had as well an Irene Etioka. So you're going to discover who they are, but hey guys, just buckle up because it's very interesting. So it was a little bit of a, let's say, challenging session because I had a technical issue, but as usual, you're never going to stop these events ruin the show, isn't it? Right? Show must go on. So guys, tune in, yeah, and enjoy. That's what I want to say.
Sense, long-term context. So, in terms of market headwinds and things that you experience in the long term, and I see we have Tony back. Welcome, Tony, laying out the panel for the students right now. We'll have Franklin speak to some of those market factors and those things that he's experienced over decades now of doing work in business in not only Africa, but the UK. And then Ivrin is going to speak to us about, a lot of the ethics of doing business and, a lot of things that, when we were putting this panel together, frankly, I had not even considered, right? We thought about her work with Ashoka and some of those sort of cross-continental issues that are experienced. Obviously, you look at Africa as a continent, and a lot of us Americans, African Americans, have the tendency to, maybe fall in love with one jurisdiction or one area or another. Maybe you're focused on the West Coast, Ivory Coast, or you're focused on in South Africa. Doing business between each one of these countries obviously becomes very difficult, problematic. There's different on the ground social, political realities, things of that nature. Ivrin's work, I think I could say on her behalf, really focuses in that space. So we're going to have a very meaningful conversation with her about the social realities and the political realities of working across countries. Because again, Africa is a continent and there's many countries within that continent. It's important to consider those political realities. So that's kind of the layout from Robert to Franklin to Ivrin. And, our illustrious host, Tony, has figured out his technical difficulties. He's going to jump in. I know Tony has questions for each one of the panelists. I also know that Ivrin gave some homework to all of you students there in the crowd. So I think towards the end, we're going to want to make sure that Vren is able to kind of quiz you guys on some of those homework questions that she gave you. I hope you guys had a chance to get to those questions. So with that, I'm going to turn things back over. So Tony, I said we would start with Robert talking about his work experience and what it took to, start his business. And then we would go to Franklin and talk about some more of the, long-term work he's done. So I'll pass the mic to Robert and you can jump in maybe when he's done.
Excellent. That's fine. I think, Robert, I'm just going to give you the mic back in a couple of seconds. Just a chance for me to very briefly introduce myself and apologize to all of you and the student. Been running webinars for many years, and I think that's one of the experiences that happened to me today. Anyway, so without wasting too much time, so Robert, I think more than happy to have you jump in because I know that you made a move and are operating in Ghana, if I'm correct. And just wanted to understand for you where were the biggest surprises when executing on the ground, and what does reality versus expectation look like when you're building the continent?
Okay, yeah, thank you, John. Thank you, John. So my experience actually in Ghana started back in 2019, and it's a long story, but I'll try to be brief. So if I stay too long, just cut me off. But I used to be an engineer at Apple on the iPhone team. I also had a startup around that time in AI, building energy modeling space. So we're managing HVAC energy consumption loads for large buildings. And I published some of the patents that I got from working at Apple on LinkedIn, and somebody from the National Society of Black Engineers in Ghana, working with the University of Ghana, reached out and they helped to develop a entrepreneurship program for engineers that wanted to kind of retool and go into the startup space. And so we spent about 3 years running that, and it was just basically a mini boot camp that engineers within Ghana would go through. Around the same time I left the startup, we sold off the IP, and I got a call from my former vice president of research to start up the Technology, Commercialization, and Innovation Office at Tennessee State University, which previously had existed. And at the same time, I was getting, or maybe within a year or so, I started getting outreach from a number of NGOs and development organizations that were working to put the same type of infrastructure in place on the continent. And so I worked with the University of Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, University of Lagos, and a few others around the continent. And I don't know, it was sort of like a perfect storm. I guess my life just kind of converged that, this is the path and this is where I should take my career. And so it was through that I got deeper into the space of economic development and venture capital, and partnered with one of my friends who was a former business professor, also at TSU. He's Ghanaian American, and his father is a chief in the Volta region of Ghana. And he's also very prominent in economic development. He, understands how to unlock capital and resources and drive those to the continent. And so over the last 2 years, we've been bringing various business delegations to Ghana just to meet with various government officials, meet people in the private sector and the university sector. And these began as just one-off engagements. But then maybe a year ago, after he left working in our mayor's office, leading economic development, he said, we should package this a business. And so we created the Conscious Group. And we have an arm of that called Conscious Immersion, which still runs those business delegations. I resigned from my role as director at TSU back in January and decided to move to Ghana full time to run things. And obviously, because our work is so Africa focused, it made it a lot easier to run things on the ground. And go back to your original question, understanding some of the realities. A few of them kind of opened up over the last 4 years, which is probably began with that. But a lot more has been unlocked since moving here, because I think kind of experiencing something for 2-3 weeks at a time, and then, becoming a resident is different considerations. But I'll speak to the business landscape, which, I'd say it's very complex if you're coming from U.S. perspective, right? Because there's such a big informal economy that takes place on the continent. The business environment is very relationship driven. And so while you might have a reputation, you might have a set of experiences, a lot of vastly being about access opportunities just based on and being in the right room. Not, who you know on a superficial basis, but who can you call, who can you WhatsApp, who can you text, late night piece of advice. And I give advice to people who want to move here, kind of internationalize and do market expansion here, is to really work those relationships and work them in an authentic way.
Thanks for that. I think it's very much valuable. And I think that's sort of first group of questions that I have for you. So in this conversation where we're talking about, from ideas to action, and that's what you've been sort of explaining to us here. So how you connected to your friends and decided to go to Ghana, staying up there, seeing surprises. That's great. And Franklin, I think you're another great example, right? So from what I understand, you grew up in Brooklyn. And obviously, you built a business very much engaging with Africa on a daily basis. What made the continent a place for you to build, not just to observe? And as a former Morehouse student, what would you say it take for you to start a business in Africa?
Yeah, thanks, Tony. Yeah, absolutely. Brooklyn in the house, always repping. Unfortunately, I'm not a Morehouse alum, unfortunately, but I think my path to African business is probably not too dissimilar from what someone in those seats would be thinking about. And, it was a combination of factors. I have to admit that, my parents are immigrants from Nigeria. So while I grew up in Brooklyn, I had at least that awareness, which was unusual in the 80s, probably, although Brooklyn was a place that was very, very Afrocentric at the time. So, that was the time of kind of leather Africa pendants and things like that. But anyway, I digress. So I would say a couple of things. I mean, I think, as Robert ably pointed out, I mean, building a business anywhere is tough. Building a business in Africa is tougher on some levels. And I think, when we think about the macro context of this discussion, one of the key factors is, both African entrepreneurs, and then in African entrepreneurs, you sort of have to bifurcate between, what are called returnees, meaning people who have been educated abroad, spent time in their careers abroad, or in my case, were fully sort of, raised abroad, and those who will kind of spend their life domestically, most of their lives domestically, and have better recent context. And then, people who don't have any recent connection, I will say, to the continent because their parents, several generations, have been born elsewhere. I think, I'll start at a general level across all those groups. I think a mistake that's often made is, I'll do what was successful in the US or Europe and do a version of that here in Africa, right? And that tends to be problematic for a number of reasons. One, that most successful businesses are businesses that are solving real problems. And the problems that you're solving in San Francisco or New York or Paris or Frankfurt are just not the same problems in Africa. Africa is at a fundamentally different stage of development. It's not, there are a lot of basic infrastructural, system, legal innovations which have not fully taken hold on the continent. And so, it's difficult to pivot and innovate around, a lack of rail capacity, a lack of power generation and transmission capacity, poor air links between African countries. Now, each of those, however, in and of themselves are opportunities, right? So I think, the disconnect is that people who have most of their sort of consciousness rooted in a place where, a lot of these problems have been solved one way or the other, are looking at, e-commerce or, something very tech oriented, SaaS, this and that. Whereas the African problems and opportunities are often at a more fundamental level, right? So organizing the agricultural supply chain, how you finance, farmers, power generation and distribution. These are kind of where the real challenges and therefore opportunities lie. So I think, step one is as you would do with anything, is the research part. Right? And I think the research part has to include, physical presence on the ground, right? Whether that's through tourist type visits, whether that's through something more structured, whether that's through an internship, a research project, an academic exchange, but spending real time on the ground, I think is really important. And just to answer your direct question as to the why, and I think, in a way, the last few years have been a blessing. I think we've been reminded that, like it or not, we are sort of visitors in these other places, even if we've made them our home for quite some time, even if we've helped build those places, even if we, did a lot to develop those places, ultimately, there's something important about, building your own sort of economic freedom and security. And for, this sort of beyond the scope of this discussion, but, I don't think that's going to be true for people of African descent until,
we do our bit to sort of make sure Africa stands on its own 2 feet. So the personal opportunity piece in going to this place that's rich with opportunity and, and in some ways wide open, but there's also a certain responsibility, at least that I feel, to contributing my quotient to the African Development Project. And I am one of these people, again, 80s Brooklyn, very much in sort of the Pan-African milieu. I'm a capital A African, so African American, Caribbean, you're Afro-Latino, wherever you're from. As far as I'm concerned, you're African, and this continent belongs to you. What this does to any other African, right? So you should take your 2 hands and grab that opportunity. And I think there's a lot of, and just speaking directly to a Morehouse audience, I think there's a lot of opportunity, commercial opportunity, entrepreneurial opportunity in terms of where you can create startups and building linkages from the diaspora back to the continent, right? That's an important thing that needs to happen. I think the continent needs the voices of African Americans, Caribbeans in particular, very different history and experiences, which I think, and perspectives, which I think the continent can strongly benefit from. So yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity there. It's where I'm going to spend the balance of my career. I have no interest in, I don't, more than enough opportunity in Africa to keep me busy for the rest of my life. So, that's where I'm focused and would love to do a lot to sort of welcome others. So I'll pause there, but have a lot more to say about the specific challenges of building a business in Africa, because they are unique and I think they shouldn't be understated.
I think I could definitely say that you have a lot to say there. And I can, let me correct you. It's not going to be the next of your life, the next of your free life,
Yeah.
So here's what we're going to do. Because we know that the student going to be here only for us for a few minutes. I'm going to let Avery speak. And after that, I'm just going to turn the table a little bit to allow them to ask questions, because I'm sure they heard all of you. And they will probably want to get 1 or 2 questions for us. And we want to make sure that we address as well their concern. So even back to you first, right? So which is obviously a nice segue to the next set of questions that we have. So why do you think, well-funded startup failed in Africa, despite having, a strong idea in teams? I know, for example, an example I can give of an idea was Jumia, even if somebody could argue that it's not necessarily African, but hey, it was actually at least marketed as an African business. The African Google, Amazon, African Amazon, but having the struggle. And I know also that you've shared a couple of case studies to the student here, so you may want to refer to them. But let me allow you to speak, and after that, we get the student to ask 1 or 2 questions.
Thanks, Tony, and hi, everybody. Kailan, could you please unmute the mic? Because to answer that question, I'm going to invite the 5 of you to just guide me through. So let's see how this goes. So hello, everybody. I can see you all. Hope you're enjoying your lunch. Yeah, so I want to throw the question back to you. Now, picture a company that has funding, more than enough funding, venture capitalists are all over it because the idea is super, pick any idea. And then from everything you've been taught in school, you know that this particular company should succeed, but it doesn't in Africa. Pick any country in Africa. What are some of the reasons why you think this happens? Sorry?
Just
speak out.
Like, see in Africa, but it was like to see it out here is, I'm assuming, like, I don't know if to be like true, but like just being an American and never been to Africa, I assume that like Americans make a lot more money than a lot more countries in Africa. So I feel like they don't have like the money just to be spending on a lot of things. But this is also me assuming this. I'm not 100% sure. I've never been to Africa before, but my assumption is that like Americans like overconsume a lot more. I feel like that's part of the reason why it succeeded in the United States, but not in Africa.
Okay, that's a really great point. So you're talking about the environment, the buying power of the market.
Yeah.
So that's very valuable. Something that sells really great everywhere. You wonder why it doesn't sell in Africa. And very quickly, to your point, I want to give an example of Netflix, who found the answer to that problem very nicely. How much do you pay for Netflix in the US?
Oh, for me, it's free.
Like,
I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah.
It's free with like you have T-Mobile.
It's
but-
like $11.99 by the regular folks.
yeah.
Yeah. How much do you think it's in Nigeria? How much do you think it's in Nigeria? Same Netflix in dollars.
$20 to 20 USD.
Nobody will buy. Nobody will. Yes.
$5.
Less than $5, actually. Yes, it's actually less than $4. It's about $3 plus. And Netflix solved the problem that ChatGPT right now has solved. ChatGPT in Nigeria too is less than $5. Wow. To pay for it a month. But Gemini is so expensive. And nobody has paid for Gemini that I know. Now, that's one thing. Understanding your market. What's another thing? So very quickly, let me see. So somebody has said buying power. What else?
The question for those of you who are wondering is why you see businesses in Africa who might not be as successful as other ones? So,
To me, the first answer I thought of is because we have a teacher up here that's from Liberia, and he talked about there's issues with some people getting water. And the first startup I thought about was like the data centers that they have like all over like the southern United States. And I was thinking if water is an issue, like resources could be an issue with some startups. Do a data center, people aren't even able to get enough water themselves.
Okay, yeah, that's an interesting one because when people talk about Africa, this is going to be my last question because of time. When you think about Africa, what are some of the biases that most people have? Poverty, hunger, lack of resources. Yeah. Now, but the government instability, regulations, that's another thing you have to think about. How market ready, how skilled, what do people think? How do people compare local versus international? But to talk to your point on resources, now that's one area that outside of finances, remember the question is, if your idea is great and you have enough resources, money, what could make you fail? Now, usually water is not an issue if you're along the coastal areas, neither are natural resources. However, access to those things is the challenge. Regulatory controls, government lack of oversight and all that. And you may think, oh, I have a certificate, I can mine, I have the go-ahead, I have the company to produce this particular product, but somehow you meet bottlenecks along the way that you didn't plan for. And that's where this whole trajectory, I gave you 3 organizations to look at, Okra, Andela, and Flutterwave. Flutterwave has found the unique opportunity to key into regulatory demands, company organizations, price controls, currency changes, all that. And that's where the power of businesses in Africa lies. The ability to understand that, oh, this is not America, this is not UK. I have to build some of the systems the same way I'm building the company. I have to build partnerships, I have to build markets, I have to create a completely new distribution system sometimes. And talking about distribution systems, I want to leave this little idea. How many of you have bought alcohol, whiskey, in a bottle? Have you ever bought alcohol in a tiny little sachet that you just tear off at the end and just... Now, that is a systems approach to distribution. And just like Franklin, I could talk a lot about this, but I want to stop there. I want you to have this, think through it. What are things I need to know? Do you see yourself as African? What are the biases that influence you as an African? If you want to start businesses in Africa, what are the things you need to know? Who do you talk to? Who need to bring on board? Which kind of partnerships you need to create? And how do you make sure that what you're building now, apart from being a good organization, a good business, a good model, can also scale globally, not just across Africa, they can take Africa to the world.
Excellent, guys. Well, what I want to say, because we have 10 minutes with the student, and they have the opportunity and the chance today to speak over to 3 renowned professionals and entrepreneurs. And I just want to give them the floor to us. Gentlemen, so do you have any question that you want to address either to Franklin, Robert, or Avery? Because like I say, it's not every day you have people in front of you, 2 of them with background from the US, building a business in Africa. So would you have a question for them?
Yeah.
Great. I can see that I can see two hands already. Yes. So the gentleman with the glasses, because I think the other one spoke the. Introduce yourself and ask a question.
All right. Good evening, every.
He picked us.
You think so?
Yep, pick a second.
All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Osai Anthony Day. I'm a third year computer science, computer engineering double major. Similar to what a lot of you said, I'm Nigerian. I was also born in Brooklyn, New York. So I resonated with a lot of what you guys said there. But I had a quick question as someone who is looking to get into like entrepreneurial spaces and things like that. So I know a lot of people, when considering Africa, more so think of like the macro markets, but like actually, or when you go to different places, I can speak for Nigeria personally, there are a lot of micro markets. You know, there are a lot of different marketplaces, a lot of different family-run businesses or whatever the case is, or things like that. So how, as business owners, do you guys think when it comes to scaling as to not thinking about these places as macro markets and understanding and respecting the system that are already in place in these countries?
I'm happy to start. So I think you actually hit on a pretty strong opportunity, in my opinion, you know, because you're right. Nigeria is a country of many, many small underlying markets with their own specific realities. And many of them are quite large, right? Like, you know, I think there's almost 10, if not 10 cities in Nigeria with, you know, 1 million population, right? 1 million person population. So, you know, 1 million people is enough of a market to tap to build a decent business, or at least start. And then similarly, you know, Northern Ghana and Southern Ghana are two very, very different places, right? And so on and so forth, right? You know, most of these countries are regional and you know, some have rural dynamics, some have urban. Each has both a rural and an urban dynamic, which are quite different. So depending on what you want to do, I think there's a lot to look at there. But coming back to the Jumia example, and what my fellow panelist Ivan was saying, which I think is spot on, is, you know, you almost have to take yourself back to first principles in Africa. I think people look for complexity that, you know, maybe they should focus on the simplicity. So coming with a Jumia idea, right, as an example, you know, you are trying to solve the problem of, you know, let me make it frictionless for you to buy a cashmere sweater online, right? Now, if you're a person hawking, you know, roadside food in Nairobi or Lagos, your problem is not the friction to buy that cashmere sweater, is the money to buy that cashmere sweater, right? So it's not even a reality for you, right? You don't even have the data to look through your phone, you know, through the selection of cashmere sweaters. I mean, so they're solving a problem that's not your problem, right? But there are, you know, more basic problems like, you know, as Ivan pointed out, like, I mean, a lot of people simply make money by bringing in big packages of things, breaking bulk, and then selling them in small quantities, right? You know, there are Indian groups that have made literally billions of dollars doing this, you know, selling noodles, you know, nuts, ground nuts, right? These are multi-billion-dollar industries. So it's these more basic concepts, right? If you just remember where Africa is at a stage of economic development, then I think you'll get ideas about opportunity. But let me let others speak.
Yeah. So if that's okay, I think, because we only have 5 minutes, if there is another question, so we can also respond to that new question with the previous one together, and then we can wrap it up for the students. I know that they're going to leave in 5 minutes. Is there any question from the floor, from the student side?
I'll say, just to give you guys a heads up, we also are planning this out to 1:30, so we have a little extra time, but we did have 2 more questions from Kobe and Theo coming out.
Oh, brilliant. So you have another 15, 1:30, right? That's what you say. Right? So okay, good. Excellent. So any other question? We had a question, please.
I had a question. How are you guys doing today? My name is Theo Menja, a business marketing major from sophomore business marketing major from San Francisco, California. And
Yeah, we can hear you. Carry on.
Okay. I'm a sophomore business marketing major from San Francisco, California, and my family is Tanzanian. And I was in Tanzania last summer, and I was seeing the economy and how businesses work and everything. I'm in that whole space. And for someone who's trying to get into working with businesses in Tanzania, specifically in Africa, what is the first step that you guys think that currently right now in the world situation in Africa right now is the first step to take and the first business model to take currently right now for me to scale further, for me to grow? And then when you guys are also making a connection, what is the first thing that you guys look for into a person you guys are connecting with to build your business and help your business grow?
Every question. So who's gonna go first, Ivory or Robert?
I'll feel that way. I'd say whichever, as far as picking a business or picking a lane that you want to follow, I think whatever you have a intrinsic connection to or insight into or, deep relationships in. So I wouldn't, I wouldn't jump into a problem that I didn't have a connection to or insight into. In addition to that, I'd say, you said, what's the first action?
Necessarily the first action to really take, because my parents do real estate in Tanzania also right now. So I was thinking about getting myself involved into that a couple of years down the line, or either products and buying and selling too. I'm just trying to see which is the first, like a good action step to take in running businesses in Africa.
Yeah. I'll go back to Franklin's point. I think going and spending time and talking with people who are,
Robert, we lost you. Okay, that's fine. Carry on.
who are relevant to this space, to the direction you're trying to go in. From a startup scale up perspective, one thing I always encourage entrepreneurs to do is do customer discovery. And a lot of people think of customers as the end user, right? But people that are within this broad customer ecosystem that influence your ability to scale and succeed with your product or technology, or your business in general, right? And so that's understanding.
Again.
That's understanding the economic buyer, that's understanding the end user, understanding saboteurs, influencers, regulators, everybody who is impacted and impacts this space, and really get a feel for what are the problems, what are the dynamics, and then figure out where then can you carve out a niche for yourself. I know you said, products and real estate, those are kind of two disparate avenues, but I think the same premise is there, just understanding, I think from online, from social media, and even from a quick vacation, you can kind of have this high level, superficial understanding of what the context is, but through conversation, through immersion, through dialogue is how you really then pull out the meat and then be able to act as a strategist and as a business operator.
Excellent. Ivan?
I think I totally agree with Robert. I'll just take it one step further. First of all, you need to understand, in Africa, we have consider the pyramid. So at the very top, you have the well-to-do, highly liquid kind of market. Then you have a very fat, but not very wide middle layer, and then a wide low-income layer. So you have to first of all figure out which market are you hoping to serve. And then you need to understand, do I know that market? Do I understand that market? If I don't, how do I immerse myself first in that market and partner with somebody from that market to really understand what do they need, what do they want? But before I will even launch, I will do a very quick, a lot of you understand tech, you understand your quick viable model. Do something in a small locality test. And people are excited. People talk about it. Do people really rush to get it? Before you scale big, do minimum viable product, something you can run, test, and see demand before you scale out. So if the demand is there, understand the cultural difference, understand how quickly they can convert your product into cash. If it's too expensive, are you going to give them multiple payment options? There's no credit system in most parts of Africa, so people have to earn the money they used to pay. So one organization that did it very well, even with airline tickets. I don't know whether it has gotten into the US, but in Nigeria, you can actually pay for airline tickets in installments. So you pay a little, till you get there. So you have to really understand which strata of the market you're going into, partner with somebody from that strata who can think from a different angle, especially if you don't belong to that strata, and then test it with a very small model, small community. Run a little thing, see the response, get the feedback, and reiterate.
Thank you.
Excellent. Let me get one more question from the student, and after that, I'll carry on with my series of questions. So I understand that we have a bit more time. I think we're probably going to finish with a 5-10 minutes later, unless our speakers like to leave earlier, because I know we start a little bit later. Is there any other question from the student that we could take? Otherwise, we continue with our series. No? Okay.
Yeah, not necessarily aligned with what we're talking about. So In the AUC, I'm a part of the African Student Association, and I would love if somehow, some way we could get in contact with each other, because we're trying to start a series in which we have professionals come talk to the African students within the AUC. So if possible, after this, I would love to follow up with you all to make that happen.
Well, I see you guys have Chick-fil-A, so I mean, some free Chick-fil-A would definitely be a good inducement.
Yeah, and I'm going to jump in on that response. Please get in contact with me. The National African Student Association is normally a partner of this conference. This conference has been going on for 30 years. And over the course of the 30 years, National African Student Association has been a major partner. So please contact me because, you all in the Africana Studies Department are really the backbone of this project. So
I'll also take the lead on making sure that I connect like the speaker's information and contact with everyone after the session. If it's okay, I also have a question. I just want to make sure that we have the time for it.
Absolutely, go for it.
Yeah, so again, my name's Kylan Kester. I'm the director of our Morehouse Startup Studio. I'm also a graduate of Morehouse College, class of 2019. One of the things that I'm really passionate about is we started this startup studio about 4 years ago. And we've had about 2 or 3 global learning experiences where we participated in European Innovation Academy. For me, I think that it makes a lot more sense for us to continue to find ways to connect our brothers, especially while they're here in Morehouse, to our roots in Africa, along different countries in the continent. And so curious to know in terms of just like, you kind of touched on some of it earlier. I think it was Franklin that spoke about it, but I'm curious to know if you've seen other universities kind of show up in different countries across Africa. And what kind of like study abroad or learning experiences that they participate in that made them strike a balance between being respectful visitors while also making a true impact for the folks that are in the communities that they visit. Just wanted to see if you have any examples of other universities or schools that have done learning experiences that might inspire, something that we might do to bring some of our students out there.
Yeah, I'll jump right in. So very quickly, I'll be very, very quick on this, but so Carnegie Mellon has a campus in Rwanda, for instance, and I think there are 1 or 2 other U.S. universities who now have campuses on the continent somewhere. There's also the African Leadership University, which was founded by 2 folks while they were at Stanford Business School. Both are, of African origin, but spent a lot of time in the U.S. That's African Leadership University. Watch this space, I guess. This is the reason why I jumped in. So we, and John's a big part of this, we're doing a lot of the work to connect African technology innovation to the HBCU community in particular, specifically. There are efforts to build a supercomputer, an HBCU supercomputer, which is being driven in large part by that. Morehouse is a part of that consortium already. There are a few companies that do everything from manufacturing semiconductor to designing chips to doing AI in Africa, who are very, very eager to leverage the talent at HBCUs. There's an organization called ARIS, African Renaissance Institute of Science and Technology, which is led by the president of SUNY Poly, who happens to be Nigerian. And ARIS are trying to build a coalition of both African, Caribbean, and HBCUs universities to create an innovation ecosystem for advanced technology. So really high power, a little bit like what, DARPA, Lawrence Livermore Labs did back in the day, to really, we want Africans, and again, capital A Africans, everybody in that room is an African as far as I'm concerned, to be producing, we don't want Africans to be simple consumers of technology. We need to be producing technology. We need to be out there, creating the next innovations. And I don't accept a low level of ambition for capital A Africans. There's no reason why we should not be at the bleeding edge of all technology and innovation, and that's what we're trying to drive. So we'd love to work with anybody on that topic.
I love it.
I'll add to that as well. So really excited about what Franklin mentioned. Really excited about what you're working on. I think to your question, Colin, this is actually what I'm doing with our business is attracting U.S. universities, especially HBCUs that want to partner, collaborate, and have student exchange. have knowledge exchange programs on the continent. Most recently, we brought in Elizabeth City State University in North Carolina. They have the largest HBCU aviation program. And in Ghana, they're right now looking to expand regional airport access. And with that needs flight training and training for all the technicians, workers, and operators that are going to be involved in the aviation industry. And so that's a direct partnership that we're architecting right now. In addition, the same university is building an entrepreneurship center that's going to serve as not only the campus, but North Carolina as a whole. And so we're partnering that incubation center with entrepreneurship support organizations on the continent. But I'll speak back to your question. We're also working with Rutgers. We're working with Tennessee State University, my alma mater. We have University of Arkansas Pine Bluff coming up on the horizon. And our approach to study abroad is, and really just collaboration and partnership in general. You don't have to just frame it on study abroad, but I think of it as knowledge exchange and a bilateral exchange of knowledge, because there's so much that you're going to gain by interacting with people on the ground in Africa, and vice versa. So much that they'll gain from you all. And our hope is that, we create these lifelong connections. And I think if you think about the project that Franklin mentioned, this is not a one-off engagement, right? This is people coming together, having a meeting of minds that are going to forge lasting relationships. And as they evolve in their career, they're going to create new businesses, new projects, new opportunities. And through that is how the African continent is going to develop, and how the African community and African and Black diaspora in the United States is going to continue to evolve and mutually benefit from each other. So that's the approach and the ultimate vision that we see. So I'm happy that you, Kyle, and Franklin mentioned what you all are working on and interested in. So I think that this space here is also where we can start to have that meeting of the minds as we speak now.
Very helpful. Thank you.
I'm going to throw in just a couple things. When I was a student from 2000 to 2005, I helped plant some of the seeds that ended up creating the Morehouse Pan-African Global Exchange Program, which is now run by Dr. Tiffany Boosie, who is the head of obviously of the Entrepreneurship Center and you all's professor, and part of who helped create this session today. So I've been talking a good bit behind the scenes with her. I see one of the graduates and former students, Mike Phillips, on the line, and he's a walking testimony right now of our efforts to expand on some of this work. There's an organization called Doing Work in Africa, and I'm going to drop a link to them in the chat, WFRICA.org, Doing Work in Africa. They sponsor internships, fellowships, partnerships with various companies, nonprofits. They help foster your work on the ground if you're interested in doing that work on the ground. So Mike is, I think, turning a little bit into our litmus test on what any kind of partnership could look like between them and the Morehouse Pan-African Global Exchange Program. I am, sort of the acting head of the Morehouse African Awareness Week Alumni Committee. So in a sense, this is me paying it forward to students like you all and keeping this baton going, keeping the light on, so to speak. But this effort becomes even stronger the more we build this alumni network. There's so many notable Morehouse alumni who are doing work in Africa right now. And the more we bring them to this collective, the more we feature them on these platforms, feature their work. If you guys go on to LinkedIn, you can follow our page. We're also building out a Morehouse page where we feature alumni's work. So many things are happening, and this is an opportune time to capture all this lightning in a bottle and be very intentional about our outreach to Africa in the way that Howard University is, right? They donned their last academic year as the Year of Africa. And because they extended that hand to Africa, Africa responded twofold and sent, delegations and politicians and philanthropic organizations, companies to do presentations and recruit students. So that's what this is really all about. And just wanted to say that plug because, the stronger you guys are as students, the more serious you guys take this stuff as students, the more we can work together to build this. So,
Yeah,
Excellent.
Well, I'm seeing how we can bring something like that to life for the students. I think that'll be really exciting to see how we can bring them out there and find ways to really make an impact, but also help them do that. I love the bilateral knowledge exchange.
Excellent. Gentlemen, I think, and lady, obviously we have Evelyn and Mary as well with us. I think there's two areas that I'd like to touch on before we wrap up. And I think if we discipline, we should be done within the next 15 minutes. So if you don't mind, first of all, we're going to overrun a little bit, if you don't mind, but this conversation is very important. I can see that a lot of you have been sharing some extremely good ideas. So there's two areas that I'd like to talk to you about. I think the first is the hidden layers. First of all, I want to start by Evelyn. So I want to understand from you, Evelyn, what is system change and why is it critical for entrepreneurship in Africa? Because we always say that, we need to have that system that is incentivizing entrepreneurship to grow in the continent. But what are we talking about here?
Thanks, Tony. And very directly, systems change is evaluating the environment, the regulations, the regulators, the mentality and institutional biases of your market, and working to plug one little problem in such a way that over time, the way things are done in that industry changes. And for a business that is building a new idea in Africa, systems change is particularly challenging because, as people like Franklin and Robert have said, you need to be conscious of the fact that systems that are established across the US are still evolving in Africa, and your work might be influential in changing those systems. And I want to ask everybody here in the room, when you walk down the street, when you're engaging with people, when you're doing stuff in America, do you consider yourself first as an African or first as an American? Or how do you see yourself? So for those of you who see yourself first as an African, are you first an African? About half?
Or African American.
Yeah, so by them, eventually when you're talking about systems and changing systems, you need to have a deep engagement with a particular system. The systems in America and the systems in Africa are slightly different. And that's why this question, especially as a business person and somebody that wants to engage, you have to know that, okay, I'm an American. I'm African American, but deep down, I understand the American system. I understand how people think. I understand how money works here. I understand that, like, if I switch on, I expect that when I turn on a switch, there's power. Those are some basic things that you take for granted as an American. Systems change requires that if you go into a new system, you understand that, I might be external to the system. To be able to work within that system, I first of all have to understand where the system is different from what I know. Which aspect? Is it the environment? Is it the people? Is it the economics? Is it government? Is it their particular traditions? What do I need to influence to be able to achieve change? And how should I go about it? Which partners do I need to bring to the table? And am I coming to this systems change as an insider or as an outsider? So that's some of the things you have to have at the back of your mind when you're thinking about systems change. You need to really understand which system and how you are positioned in that. And over time, can you influence the system in such a way that's beneficial to everybody in that system? Or is it only tied to the profit you want to make? Those are questions you have to think through when you're talking about systems change. Back to you, Tony.
Excellent. A very deep question. So let me go to one more question before I actually kickstart the last batch of questions that I have, which I'm sure you will all agree and enjoy. So Franklin, how should diaspora founder adjust their expectation when entering African market? I think you sort of touched on that a little bit.
Yeah, no, this is one of my favorite topics, by the way, and I can go on endlessly. And I'm going to sound harsh, but I myself went through all of these steps, and so I'm really making fun of my former self, right? So I was a banker for a long time. Didn't really talk about my background. Wall Street, New York, London, some time in Asia, etc. And 10 years ago, I said, well, a little bit before that, but 10 years ago, officially, I want to focus all my energy on Africa and investing in Africa. And, had done some stuff prior to that, African projects. And, I went out there, right? And the main mistakes you make, as a diaspora, a founder coming into Africa, are two in particular. There are many, but there are two in particular. One is, I am coming to solve Africa's problems, right? I'm a hero. I'm heroic. These people don't understand. I'm going to bring all these new ideas and technology they've never seen before. I'm going to solve all these problems because, I went to Morehouse, I went to Howard, I went to Harvard. I've got a law degree from Yale. I know all these new things. I read all these books. I read about neoliberal economics, and I'm going to show off. And you will be humbled very quickly because what you will learn is that, there's over 1 billion people on the continent. Many of them are very smart, right? Many of them also went to Harvard or Oxford or wherever you went, right? It's not, Africa is not in the position and because there's people there who don't understand something that you understand, right? So that's one thing to be disabused of immediately. The second thing is people come up with business ideas. And I'm going to put it in an analogy. They come up with business ideas that will sound good. They're pick a alma mater reunion, right? So you went to Stanford Business School, went to Harvard Business School, and you're coming back for that reunion and you feel like I got to have something to say. I'm going to Morehouse reunion. I'm going to Spellhouse reunion. I want to have something. I want to be the person who has been the most successful. So you come up with it, and it's sometimes subconscious, but you're coming up with this business idea for how it sounds, your network, which is, as Ivan was talking about, systems, which is largely of another system, right? So, your whole socialization is of another system. So you're like, oh, what's great? I'm going to do the Amazon of Africa. I'm going to do the, Anthropic of Nigeria. I'm going to, whatever's sexy in the culture that you really understand, I'm going to do that version in Nairobi, in Uganda, wherever. That is a recipe for disaster. You will lose money. You will fail, right? Because, as I said, a successful business is solving the problem in the market that is in. So the first thing you need to do is deeply understand that market. And as Ivan was talking about with these systems and the questions she asked, you need to think like your customer. You need to think like a local. You need to understand what are their pain points, what are the rhythms of their day, what's deeply important to them, what makes them emotional. A lot of business and purchase decisions are emotional decisions. They're not logical decisions, right? So, what kinds of things do these people really, 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 really care about? What drives them? And only way you can do that is to spend time and immerse yourself. It's what I will say is that it is very doable because who gets it right? Indians, Chinese, Lebanese, they're not African, right? But they come, they study us, they join us. You'll see them. They'll be wearing local clothes. They'll go to the market, right? Like they'll hang out. They'll call you my brother, this and that, right? Because they're trying to understand, how do I extract money from you, right? And that's a psychological process. So I'll stop there in the interest of time, but I think doing well is largely a psychological preparation process and not assuming that what you're going to find there is what you left from here.
That's a brilliant answer. In fact, I asked you the question because that was the nice segue to the last part of this conversation, where we're talking about things, the real talk, right? That's what we're doing here, and that's what you said. Thing that we don't easily say publicly, but I definitely wanted to share the message because these students need to hear that, because a number of them, I think I have at least two who said that express interest doing business in Africa. So you need to understand those hard truths. So Robert, I turn to you. What would you say in your experience, what separates founders who succeed to those who quietly fail? What would be the difference there?
Good question. So I think, we heard a lot of feedback from my co-panelists. And I think that those are the disciplines that you have to undertake when you are entering into Africa, wanting to do business, right? Understanding your customers, understanding the market, getting deep with the locals and understanding the local context. And so what separates are the people who are willing to do this, and willing to go through these steps, right? Not see them as an inconvenience or an obstacle to be navigated, but something, seeing these infrastructure gaps, these realities as a feature of what doing business in Africa looks like, right? And, coming up with mitigations for each risk factor, coming up with different solutions for each of these, micro problems that you're going to uncover. And through that, that's how you create something that's unique and something that, where you have a defensible niche, where you have a moat, and that's something that you can scale and take, as Brent said, Africa to the world. And I think that just underpins what you might learn in your startup studio, your business classes, is going back to what I said before, customer discovery, understanding the context, understanding the people, understanding the real situation, right? And often you have to go a few layers deep. You have to have real dialogue, real conversation. You have to be present in Africa. You might have to go to Africa a few times. So there, and again, is that discipline, right? The energetic cost, the capital cost, the psychological cost that you have to bear to really understand the problem, especially coming from Morehouse, because as Ira said, you're coming, I'm assuming, from a certain socioeconomic strata, right? And where you're not going to Africa next, you're going to most likely occupy a white collar job, right? And you're going to live a white collar lifestyle, right? And if the problem that you're going to solve in Africa mirrors that, and that's fine, but even then you're going to still uncover different realities, right? And so, again, it's that discipline of really understanding the people and the context and environment that you got to be building here, and willing to lay out that roadmap at the beginning and come to grips with that mentally, emotionally, and execute on that plan that you lay out.
Excellent. And the last question for me would be on the panel, maybe to you, Everin. So where do most impact-driven venture go wrong in practice? Because it's always nice and fancy to hear impact-driven. That's great, but a lot of them actually fail. And I heard, for example, yesterday, a company that I value a lot. Fortunately, they told me that they would have to close the office because they have no more runway to go through. But according to you, Ivan, so what would you say? Where do they go wrong? And we're just gonna close on that.
Specifically for